to bring in this information and share it. That information, again, and for many of us in many of our countries, that may be where we stop with law enforcement. Interpol is able to take an extra step that many of us from a sovereign standpoint can't, and that's where they operationalize. They then brought everyone together in the Americas region, and they started discussing how to combat arms trafficking and drug trafficking by small vessel in Central America and the Caribbean. It's called Operation Lionfish. And again, I'll go through that here in a moment. But again, it's more about not only putting a practice into place, but putting that practice into action. I want to say it was General Dempsey who reported, or who stated in his capstone document, and he was talking about military successes, but the same can be said for law enforcement. You know, we're going to build a stronger network to defeat the networks that confront us. And that's what this is about. They're going to focus these networks, though, not on the big picture. Interpol does realize that you can't necessarily attack an illicit network in all its arms. You have to break it down. They will work on regional, multinational efforts to combat the networks by emphasizing detection and dismantling of the smaller groups. So it may be financial, it may be travel. It certainly could be the actions themselves. But they want to do that in terms of exposing the whole, to bring information together and to share that information across the membership. And that'll allow the members to do something also, to focus on the immediate threats in their home. It's one thing to come together and share for an international operation, but ultimately every one of us has someone to answer to back home. And the question becomes, how does this make us safer here? If you're in the United States, and matter of fact, any of the countries represented here, I would say that this conversation is being had right now at a number of levels following the disappearance of MH370. I know Interpol has discussed and been in the paper with the stolen and lost travel documents database. Is it being used by the countries? Is it being queried? Are the countries supporting it? Are they participating? I've been on the Hill myself, and the questions are, what do all these steps mean? How does this make us safer? And the answer is, quite simply, that the more we participate, the more we share, the more we extend this out and utilize these resources, again, putting theory and practice into practice, the better off we are. The U.S. is fortunate in that we have a very evolved system for border management. However, in many countries, border management doesn't even talk to law enforcement. They're not using this. If you look at the issuing authority for a passport or a travel document, they may not necessarily talk to not only law enforcement, but the military as well. Some countries can't necessarily tell us how many documents are lost or stolen. So trying to bring this together, Interpol has formed a border management task force in which they will go in, conduct an assessment, work with the member country to establish those lines of communication, again, building capacity, and then put that into practice through an operation, generally at ports of entry. Some of the tools of the trade from Interpol. Again, global police communications. I can't emphasize enough. 25, 26 years ago down on the southwest border, if I needed something from Mexican authorities, I went and saw them, I contacted them. I wouldn't have used Interpol. And I'll be candid with you. Standing up here as the director, that's a hard thing to say. But 25 years ago, to get a red notice out or to get information might have taken weeks, months. Because back then they were working on phone, mail, if you were lucky, fax. That changed following 9/11. With Secretary General Noble in 2003, he fired up the I-24/7. And it's a secure virtual private network that it enables all 190 member countries to communicate 24/7. We can now move data back and forth with immediacy that we never had before. That changes how we view the organization and how we can utilize the organization. What for me might have been irrelevant then, now, is a radically different approach. I can now look at what we can do here in the United States and with our partners, and we can have a red notice out in, I think our best time right now is about 2 hours. And that red notice looks, for those of you that have seen one, suspiciously like a provisional arrest warrant. That's the way we draft them. And we do that for a reason. We want to get that information into foreign hands to action law enforcement activities against a bad actor as quickly as possible. In many cases, that will be followed up by an official provisional arrest warrant and an extradition package. But I will say that in about a third of the member countries of Interpol, they won't wait for the provisional arrest warrant. If that red notice is acceptable, they will move forward. that makes it an empowering tool, and it certainly is a tool that we should all have in our toolboxes. In terms of global police communications, we're talking about not only sending messages, right, packages of information, but we're talking about DNA profiles. We're talking about facial recognition, photographs, biometrics, certainly DNA. It gets into everything. I think I wanted to say, I can't remember how many operational databases they have at this point, but Interpol's queries by all of our member countries collectively last year were over 1 billion for the first time. Those resources also go into child exploitation and the International Child Sex Exploitation Database. For those of you that have need of that resource, reach out to your National Central Bureau, contact Interpol. I will tell you that it was one of the programs that I was fortunate enough to be around when I saw start. It was meant to detect and identify distribution networks of child pornography. Ultimately, what it resulted in doing for us was becoming a tool by which we were able to apply a social media component with our law enforcement partners, and we've started identifying victims. And we began identifying more and more victims. And suddenly, our tool for attacking the violator was actually used to find and locate victims. And I will submit to you that if you find a victim or a series of victims, you will find a violator. And that's what happened. Not only did we begin rescuing more victims, but we began arresting more violators. So that system is coming online. Firearms tracing, ballistics identification. And of course, up in the upper corner, we see travel documents, passport controls. One of the projects in the U.S. in which the military was kind enough to join us, along with NCIS and the Department of State, was creating a maritime piracy database. At the time, the Gulf of Aden was very hot. This goes back 2010, 2011. And there was no central repository for this information. Cases were going down in the Gulf. Information was coming back, but it was bits and pieces from various sources. We started putting together a database, and that database kept growing, and we started using it then to identify illicit networks, because suddenly we went from just simple incidents and tracking of incidents to bringing out the details on the pirates and the financiers, telephone information and activity. Even the Bureau of Prisons got into play because communications between pirates in prison and those on the outside became relevant. We started taking a look at currency and bank accounts, the financial systems used to make ransom payments, the hijacking incidents themselves, and of course the vessels. And by vessels, I mean everything from the subjects of the hijacking all the way down to the boats used in the hijacking, even down to the serial numbers on the motors of the boats used in the hijacking. In a single incident, we begin to look at something like this. Not only do we see the incident, but we start to see the cell phones used for the conversations between the ransom taker and authorities. We figure out the hierarchy here, again, and we're talking about Somali piracy. So we're largely looking at clans that we can even drill down into neighborhoods in Mogadishu and explain the relationship and the links between them. So who was a captain? Who was a negotiator? Who was a commander on a particular incident? How does that tie into the users, the financiers? We started bringing in information not only from the U.S. military, but also from UNAV-4 and foreign military as well. Foreign law enforcement then kicked in to a great degree, and then we started seeing private industry come forward, not only from insurers, but also to shipping and transportation concerns. Ultimately, we go from something as simple as this to something that begins to look like this. And in these incidents, we begin to pull this information together. Now, don't strain your eyes. I know you're not going to be able to read that. It's meant to be illustrative only. But as we pull that together, we wanted this database to grow and go further. And that's where Interpol stepped in and they said, the U.S. is hosting this database and you've done a great job, but if you'll be so kind as to transfer that over here, we will solicit as much information as possible from the 190 member countries. And they have done just that. The database continues to grow, continues to be used, but now we're starting to take a look at Asia. We're starting to take a look at the Gulf of Guinea for the same type of activities. So in terms of databases, we talk about stolen lost travel documents. Again, how does that relate to MH370? Two subjects, Iranians, had an Austrian and an Italian passport that were on that flight. Now, I was asked specifically if we had run against this database, would that plane have gone down? I submit that we don't know that. I can't say that for a fact. I can say this, though. Had those been run, either by the incoming country or the outgoing country, we know that there's 2 people that would not have been on that flight. So while we still continue to have this, this investigation and we're putting resources to it, we do know that there are nearly 40 million records in that database. It makes it one of the largest databases of its kind in the world. It's got 167 member countries participating in it. The U.S. has recently fallen off to number 3 on the list. We have 3 million records in there. We were number 2. The Netherlands is now number 2. That's something I personally aspire to be like 50th or lower. I don't know that I necessarily want the most documents in the database. But I can tell you Department of State is considerably involved in this. We update that record every day. Now, the other thing you'll hear about this database is these are all the lost and stolen travel documents. No, these are all the lost and stolen travel documents reported to issuing authorities. It's a big, big difference. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. A check against this database by Interpol, we've heard discourse that says it takes too long. It would slow down travel. It takes about 2/100ths of a second to scan the MRZ on a passport or to enter a number and get a response back. That's cost effective, that's quick and expedient, that's a high yield, low cost resource to have. Global notices, these are perhaps what you've heard about. Most frequently you'll hear about red notices. Those are what come up in the paper more and more as subjects are being arrested around the world. Red notices, quite frankly, are simply a lookout with an intent to arrest for the purposes of extradition. We use these quite heavily. Blue notices is where we're going to be looking for a subject. It could be maybe someone we don't have the ability to arrest quite yet. We're still conducting our investigation. It might be a witness. It also might be a victim. A green notice, you know what, I'm going to come back to green. Yellow is a missing person, adult, child, mostly children. We use that to track quite a few parental abductions, actually. Black notices, unidentified dead bodies. Orange notices, you'll see these coming out, prison breaks, activities that are timely and require an exigent response will go out. I think the last one we had was a prison break on the southwest border. Obviously, as they escaped, they were looking to head north. We got that information out. And a purple notice is more of a traditional intelligence notice that we all see and use every day. It's a nice picture of a young man that was getting a free ride and a few free meals for a couple of years under a red notice from the United States down in Colombia. A blue notice, again, this is looking for people. This is literally a global lookout. This is in the systems. If somebody comes up, you will get a message saying we have located so-and-so. Locates can be discreet. Just tell us who they are, who you encounter, and what they're doing, where they're going. Give us that information. They may also be overt. They may approach them. You may want questions asked of these people. In my first year at Interpol, I was working with an FBI partner, and it was kind of interesting because we were talking about using these notices and we were increasing the use of them, and he came in one day as hot as could be. One of his targets had been picked up, and he was asked, he specifically put in bold letters in this notice, discreet, locate only. And then he found out that it was anything but discreet. It was overt as can be. We sent a quick message over to our partner overseas and said, how could you do this? He knows we're looking at him now. He didn't know before. We're tracking and monitoring his movements, and now he knows. And they said, you said to be discreet. We followed him away from the airport. We waited until he was near an alley. We pulled him right in, and we began to question him aggressively. We got your information. We said, well, thank you very much. But we're pretty sure he's not going to be coming back to the United States anytime soon, so we're going to have to probably move to a red notice as quickly as we can. So, you know, back to my point, where Interpol overcomes linguistic and cultural barriers, there's a good lesson learned right there. Green notices have been one of the most underutilized tools of Interpol's arsenal. These are after the fact. Almost all notices are proactive in some sense. They're seeking some type of information. This notice is where they're providing information about a violator. This is where they want to tell you this person is a known gang member. He's a pedophile. He's a foreign fighter. His activities are tied to IEDs that have been used in bombings overseas. What it does is it does, there's been privacy concerns and discussions about this, but it does not mean that a country cannot allow travel. It doesn't mean a country cannot accept somebody in. What it does is it gives each of us, all of our countries, the ability to better regulate and control our borders. You determine if you want this person crossing your border. In other words, if they show up and they're seeking admittance and you find out that there were a foreign fighter identified in Syria, that may be somebody you want to be taking a look at. You might want to investigate them. You may want to deny them entry, depending on the circumstance. I can tell you with pedophiles right now, if we get information on a pedophile here, I don't know of anyone that's ever been allowed to enter the United States, nor do I know of any of our partners that have allowed them to enter their countries if they're traveling. It's a good neighbor policy, and the U.S. is using this very aggressively. There will be, I want to say the end of May, 28 to 30 in Granada, Spain. Interpol is hosting a conference on transnational travel by foreign fighters. They'll be focused on fighters in the Middle East, Afghanistan, and the Horn of Africa. Last year was Syria, and prior to that, we talk about breaking things down into manageable chunks. They were looking at travel systems, and they were looking at monetary and financial systems as well, all within that terrorist travel group. These notices become a very effective tool. We've used them with Afghanistan, Iraq, Guantanamo, and we continue to expand and extend these out to make sure that our partners have these resources. In this case, the military has been our best partner, getting the information into hands where it is, again, able to be actioned. And the beauty of it is getting information back, because once these notices are out, these people are outside of our control. They're now back in the international community and they're moving around. We don't know where they're going to go. However, when they turn up, we get a notice back and we can communicate with you to find out what you know, what you see, and add context to what you're seeing, because now we can add context and tell you what we know. Very powerful tool, and it's one that I certainly hope we'll see more of. We talked about border management a little bit earlier, and I told you I would come back to it. These operations were conducted last year in 2013, pretty much throughout all hemispheres. Operation Infra-Americas was a focus on human trafficking, weapons and arms smuggling, and drug trafficking in the Central America and the Caribbean. We also had lionfish, we spoke about that earlier, but you see Operation Stop, Operation Hawk. These are all themed operations. We talk about Stop. We have 20 operations over 15 countries, more than 120,000 targeted searches. More than 200 officers were trained at that time. Again, training, capacity building, assessment, and putting practice into action. Hawk, counterterrorism and border security as it relates to border security. Here we have 8 countries and 131 officers trained, over 21,000 searches conducted with 16 hits. Those operations resulted in 72 kilograms of sodium chlorate being seized. And lionfish, we talked about that. It was a kind of a massive undertaking when you talk about small vessels and small craft. Yet 34 countries participated, 142 arrests, and over 30 tons of cocaine. This is a short window operation. We're talking about 30 plus or minus days. So where do we go for the future? I mentioned Interpol will be opening a new complex in Singapore in 2014. This is that complex. It is literally a stone's throw from the American Embassy, the UK Embassy or the Australian Embassy, right across the street. It's about $200 million worth of donation by the Singaporean government, and it will house a number of programs for Interpol there. It will be an operational center, so Interpol maintains 24/7 operations. In Leon, those operations have now been extended to a regional bureau in Buenos Aires, so it's 18 on and, or 16 on in Leon, 8 on in Buenos Aires right now. That'll break down and they'll go to a follow the sun model. So 8, 8, and 8 with the last 8 being now done in Singapore before it comes around again. Distributes the workload geographically, number one. Number two, it'll hopefully help lower some costs on the organization. but it'll also enhance information sharing opportunities globally. They will also add partnership and capacity building will be a new division there. Sports events and major events training will be conducted out of there. Sports integrity will be conducted out of there. A partnership with FIFA. But most notably will be the establishment, really, for the first time, of Interpol's cyber security program. So not only will you have operational, you'll have investigations, you'll have what we would term classic digital forensics, and in my past, I used to run the Homeland Security Investigations Cyber Crime Center here. So this is near and dear to my heart. This is one of the groups that I chair within the Interpol community, and I look forward to seeing this open in September 30 of 2014. This year will be the soft opening of that with a grand opening in April of next year. They will also bring in a research and a development team, capacity building team, and a partnership team. The idea is to expand Interpol's access into the cyber community, bring together what we know collectively from a national perspective, and add that to the discussion on the international level to provide that capability to those countries that don't have it. So right off the bat, I can tell you that capacity building and training are going to be paramount. That's where we need to start. Having sat through these meetings, I've sat with countries that have incredible capacity. They can handle cyber. What they need is information and the exchange of information, and that's what brings them to the table. And they could be sitting right next to a country that has not one trained, right, certified law enforcement officer to handle cyber issues. You'll see this again play out, the same theory, networking, leveraging, harmonizing, right? So investors and stakeholders, bringing that together with partnerships and test bedding technology in Singapore, and of course national legislations, in many cases building legislation, or recommending best practice where there is none. I'm trying to keep us on schedule here, so if I'm flying through this a little bit, forgive me, but I'll come back to any questions you may have. I want to make sure you're on schedule. So how do you get these resources? In all the member countries, a condition of membership in Interpol is that you maintain a national central bureau, a 24/7 point of contact by which all these communications and operations will be coordinated and take place. It is the business point of contact. In most countries, it resides with a national authority or a central authority. The United States, we do not have a national or a central authority. In the United States, we're constituted as an independent agency under the Department of Justice. We are appropriated by Congress, and we are unique, I feel, in that we are co-managed between the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. Our leadership rotates every 3 years. I am currently from the Department of Homeland Security. I come from Homeland Security Investigations. My deputy is from the U.S. Marshal Service under the Department of Justice. As I rotate out in about 18 months, he'll step forward, and the position we'll compete will be for the Deputy Director, again, from within Homeland Security. Our thought being on that is that those two departments are massive. To learn those two departments and to learn everything you need to know to work with Interpol, you've got about 3 years to do that as the Deputy Director. By the time you step up into the Director slot, you're expected to know and execute. We are constituted under law. We are not administratively created. We are under Title 22, USC 263 and 28 CFR 0.34 under the Attorney General. It describes our mission, and quite frankly, it's to represent the Attorney General to Interpol, to communicate information of a humanitarian or law enforcement-related nature, and to coordinate and integrate information and investigations. While humanitarian doesn't seem like a lot, Interpol has a very renowned capacity for disaster victim identification, major events, incident response. U.S. participates in all of those. We also, I'll tell you, if you wonder if the I-24/7 works, getting a message into another country, we've been able now here in the States to be able to take a foreign lead across a social network indicating that there's a suicide or a threat in progress. The last threat I can remember, somebody said something akin to, I'm preparing to go out and turn my local school into a war zone. It's going to make Columbine look like it was a playground. We had attribution down to that IP address. We had that subject located, and FBI was knocking on his door a little over 2 hours. We've done the same with suicides. Well, 90% of them come through, and they are, quite frankly, boguses. You find it, regrettably, it's it's some 38-year-old dude sitting in his mom's basement. It's kind of a profile for a lot of these gamers. And they're, I'm sorry, it is. And they're putting this stuff out on the internet. And we like to send in law enforcement, put boots on the ground locally, and have a chat with those young men. We do maintain, since we talk about that in the U.S., we maintain liaisons in all 50 states at the state authority, 12 major cities, and in all 5 territories of the U.S. That's what helps us drill down and get that information into the hands of those that need it as quickly as possible. When we take a look at the Interpol's rules I spoke about earlier, quite frankly, this is what we're after. How do we get this information? We have a responsibility to not only maintain all the information on behalf of the U.S. that's in the Interpol system, but to make sure that that information is provided out. In terms of messages, notices, and diffusions, we control all that. And we come to that from a strategic approach. In the U.S., I'm constantly shocked at how many people, I take certain things for granted in the U.S. All of our systems are relatively disparate. There is no central point to go and run somebody's name and get a response that's encompassing across the total breadth of the government. I wish it were so, but it's not. So how do we take all this global information and get it into those systems? Well, we do that through a strategic plan that it quite frankly focuses on the use of the Department of State and the military, Department of Defense, but also heavy on Department of Justice and Homeland Security. We create sharing environments by which this information can be accessed either by query or direct access. Within the states, we have only 3 states right now that cannot access this information without coming to us to get it. In matter of fact, in 9 of the states, they've federated. Every query they run bounces against international data. 20 years ago, I want to say we ran a total of about 1.4 million queries. So we're looking at 1994. Texas does about 2 million a month alone right now. When I mentioned there was 1 billion queries of Interpol right now, the United States accounted for nearly a third of those queries. And we do so mindful of the fact that we have to be, we have to maintain deference to privacy and certainly what the native capabilities are on IT. Now, we talked about how Interpol is constituted for us in the United States. We took that to heart. That's a model we use here. These are just some of the agencies that we have here. Our workforce right now is about 75 people in Washington, D.C. under the Department of Justice, another 55 to 57 from over 30 different federal, state, and local agencies, including the Department of Defense. We have very tight relationships with NCIS, OSI, CID, but also with the military itself and the COCOMs. Do a considerable amount of work with them, especially globally, in terms of biometrics and capacity building, foreign fighters, and disrupting travel on these networks. The nice thing about this group, I will say this, I've worked in a lot of task forces, and I would never disparage any of them, but this is one in which every officer that we have is a senior officer, generally a minimum of 15 years of experience. So even if you're looking at a domestic issue here in the United States, I would encourage you to reach out if you're looking for a point of contact, because these folks work together day in, day out. I've seen FBI working with everybody, DEA working with everybody, ICE, Secret Service, you name it, coming together and getting answers and getting information out the door. They do so with blinding speed. In some cases, we manage to get out in front of issues before they even turn into a major issue or a major difficulty for us. So I promised I would end at 4, and that's where I am. I know this was quick and it was very brief and it was relatively high level, but if there's anything, I'll certainly be happy to take any questions. I think you've got a breakout group, Stan, and I will stay for that, but sir?
Okay, we have time for questions. Wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the efforts. On behalf of Afghan people, I want to thank for the resources you provided. But back to the weird part of your organization. This is so strange for me, Interpol. I don't understand it. First, the leadership is all the time picked up from specific countries. Other, with all the achievements that you mentioned, the number of crimes are increasing more and more. So I see your organization as a kind of bulletin of information which is used by wrong people. So do you think there's some problems with the structure of organizations or something which you're not considering, that all these efforts of so many countries are being wasted?
Sorry, I was having a hard time hearing you. You're asking about the structure of the organization and difficulties in getting information between member countries, and are those efforts
No, the
wasted?
informations, we see these institutions as a kind of bulletin of information. So every country could have access to this sort of information, but they
Correct.
want. It depends on the law enforcement and also the country's qualifications, how to use those informations and trace that back.
Right.
But why the number of crimes are increasing? When you provide all these informations, then there's something that you're providing and these are being misused or wrongly used. So
Okay.
it turns back to you that why do you provide such kind of information? And back, the structure of our institution is so like only British, Americans, and some other leaders, in fact, were the ones picked up for leadership. Why? Why not 190, two other countries were not on the leadership level?
Well, I'll give you an example of leadership. Right now, they are currently soliciting for the position of Secretary General. Ronald Noble is the first American to sit in that chair, and he has served 3 terms of 5 years. He will be stepping down, and they are now soliciting for that position. And I can tell you that I've seen the candidate field, and it's probably as broad and diverse. It was much larger than I thought it would be for the post of Secretary General. I do know that they are very mindful of making sure that these positions in leadership, especially in Singapore, you see a great amount of diversity there. Interpol is working to make sure that that kind of diversity is back in there. But again, I think part of the problem that you allude to and why you see certain countries reflected more than others is simply because those countries may have the capability of seconding or placing people within Interpol to provide support. So when cost becomes a factor, that certainly can change that equation a little bit. In terms of misuse of Interpol's resources, under Article 3 of its Constitution, that's essentially its neutrality clause. And we're all familiar with those in terms of extradition. But essentially it says that nothing of a military, racial, religious character will be allowed to transit those systems. So if the U.S. or any country were to institute a red notice and it was deemed that it was for political purposes, that notice would be scrubbed from all member countries. It would literally, that would go out and they would tell every member country to remove that from the systems and take no action, at least via Interpol. It does not prevent a country from taking a bilateral action or a regional action. It just simply means that within Interpol, you can't use those resources. We see this, and it's resulted in some confusion when a red notice is revoked by Interpol. They push something out, they say, tell the member countries do not act upon this. This hits the press and it says that this has been done, there's no longer a global manhunt, right? That doesn't mean you're not still in danger. That just means that Interpol, as an international organization, is not going to support a lookout for you. It does not mean that an individual country or group of countries can still not be on the lookout for you. So in terms of that, I think they're very good. They're getting better. They have a commission for the control of files, which handles privacy issues, and it also reviews the use of these red notices. Matter of fact, all the notices, and all the tools for that matter. And that commission is actually about as diverse of a group as I think I've seen within Interpol. If there's anything specific, I'll be happy to discuss it with you. On the side, I'd be interested to hear the narrative on that. Again, I know I'm moving kind of quickly through some of these things, but are there any other questions?
Can I ask how the Internet has changed the nature of Interpol, and where do you see Interpol 10 years from now? I mean, how is it going to evolve? I know the Internet has made it easier for Interpol, but it's also helped the other side as well in how they use. I mean, I'm thinking of trafficking in persons. It used to be, you know, you had to have physical contact or eye contact with a predator. Now you can advertise on the Internet, and it's changed the whole nature of that particular idea as well. But can you reflect a little bit on the role of the Internet and where you see the Interpol being 10 years from now?
I think the Internet's permeated pretty much everything that we're doing right now. in terms of whether it's directly responsible for a criminal attack or a network attack, or even if it's command and control for something that's going on in its communications. With terrorism, we look at fundraising, right? We look at socialization, radicalization via the internet. It gives everyone, and we heard this from John, it gives everyone a voice. Now, Interpol is taking a look at this, and again, these are new programs. I would say that they're not necessarily new programs in terms of the regional efforts that have been going on, but from a global standpoint, they are now taking a look at how they want to establish this. As to where I see it going in the next 10 years, I see the continued expansion and proliferation of information sharing and services, and new models for that. Interpol's original conception of how they would exchange data was that they would become a repository. All member countries could send data in and they would house this data. Now you go back again and let's look at where we were 15 years ago in this kind of a conversation, how much data fills a space, and all of a sudden Interpol would become the world's largest repository, be turned into a server farm, not necessarily any kind of a law enforcement organization. And that really doesn't do much in terms of sovereignty. It's not very respectful of sovereignty. What they do is member countries are allowed to participate and add information as they would like, but Interpol is starting to create a new model for information sharing by which countries can directly communicate. The U.S. is supportive of this. I don't necessarily need to give all of my data out, but I want to give others access to it. They should be able to query the data and at least find out a yes or a no, if you will, a red light or a green light, a hit or no hit. Expedient information sharing. Right now, instead of having to send a message to me to say, is this person wanted, if you could query that information and find out there's something you need to contact us about, then you know to come to us and come correct, and we can work together as quickly and efficiently as possible. But the negative allows you to move forward with your investigation and not waste time. We'll see new information sharing capabilities built. Right now, we're limited in the bandwidth. The nice thing about technology is that expands. It enables Interpol to push its resources out to law enforcement officers via handheld units, and we've seen that. In Maryland, as they run queries, I've literally seen officers in Maryland getting Interpol hits on their handhelds. We will see new tools, hopefully to provide consumers with the ability to make better judgment. Interpol is looking at that along with some of the member countries. Is there a way to help secure the supply chain, provide a tool to law enforcement? Maybe they can scan a code or a barcode, a Q code, and take a look at a product and determine if it's registered or not. Is it a licit product or is it an illicit product? And that kind of technology can be pushed down into the hands of consumers. Interpol has been an organization of and for law enforcement, but they do have some outreach into the public. I can think in terms of, you mentioned child exploitation. There's only been 2 global manhunts in the past, VICO and IDENT. And the reason that there were only 2 global manhunts is we all know that if we do this every day, if we push it out all the time, it becomes less special. People don't pay attention. If everything is important, right, nothing is important. And what they found out was that by pushing these in the way that they had, I want to say that these 2, VICO was the first one, and that subject was arrested within a week. The second one was IDENT, and they picked him up within 24 hours. So our ability to communicate and put information into hands that can use it and action it as quickly as possible will continue to increase. That'll increase border security. That'll increase our ability to move cargo and enhance commerce, and to do so with a mindful aspects of security involved in that, in law enforcement. Again, the military and the partnership of the military plays a great role in this. In many cases, they're able to provide us with information that they see currently out of theaters and off the battlefields that is directly relevant as we talk about counterterrorism. That information comes in that may come from cell phones, computers, what have you. Once it's declassified and it comes to us from our partners, we can then action that information in law enforcement hands. Because those foreign fighters, as we've discussed, are going to come home at some point in time. What are they bringing with them? How are they going to radicalize? Are they going to bring an increased level of violence into our communities that wasn't there before? How do we get that information? And again, I think that's where these great partnerships are forged. We talk about networking. We talk about, again, leveraging, harmonizing, creating a playing field in which everybody can share this information. That becomes tantamount to our success. Now, having said all that, if there is anything we can do,
I'll try and make it very easy on you. Of course, you said 190 countries
Right.
participate in Interpol, so I will not ask you which countries those are. But what I will ask you is, which countries do not participate, what's the impact, and what's the reason?
really the only major population that does not participate is North Korea. Essentially, that's it.
I think I can guess the reason.
I was going to say, I could probably maybe sheds a little light on that, but I don't think so. Given the audience, you'd probably be telling me more about why they're not participating. But that is, truthfully, that is the largest populace that does not participate in Interpol. I want to say maybe the UN is at 100, and maybe somebody can correct me here. UN is 192? 193. So you've got 190 at Interpol. And again, the beauty of Interpol is that it was brought together by heads of law enforcement that were trying to talk about common problems that they had 100 years ago that we still see relevant today. What it also creates for us, for every one of our countries, is opportunities. Because at the end of the day, despite geopolitical differences, and there may be cool relationships, right? Relationships diplomatically, high tide, low tide, back again. Despite that, law enforcement officers, military officers, we want to see the right thing done. We want to see justice done. We want to see criminals put in jail. None of us would support murderers being loose on our streets, rapists. We've seen Interpol become a conduit for that kind of information to flow when maybe diplomatically it's harder to move that information back and forth. There's a big difference between saying, I partnered with this country in front of the international world and on a stage, and saying, I, as a member of an international organization to which I voluntarily joined, participated in this global event that resulted in the arrest of this subject that enhances the security of us all. It's a completely different narrative, and it's one that I think Interpol does very well.
Okay, any other questions, General?
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm much more informed now after that hour or so about Interpol than I was an hour ago. I have to admit I was a bit naive about what you folks do, to be really honest. And to listen to you, I was able to connect what you've done with 190 countries now to what we've done in U.S. Special Operations Command. We're all about building a network ourselves after the attack of 9/11. We got really focused on building an attack against violent extremist organizations. So we've gotten pretty good at it in piecing that together. But frankly, you kind of have the same mission that we have in Special Operations. We're in a manhunting business ourselves, members of violent extremist organizations. You're in a manhunting business against criminal organizations that are transnational. So there's a lot of similarities here after I listen to you speak about it. And I tell you what, I admire the work that's been done over the last several years now, putting that network together. We're all better off for it.
I appreciate it.
So we wish you the best of luck in the sacrifices that you've made along the way to put this network together. We're here to hopefully help you in some ways in your organization. What I'm curious about, I want to talk to you on a break, have we rolled you into our network?
You know, honestly, that's increased over the last several years, and like I said, mostly through the COCOMs.
Good.
As a matter of fact, those projects that are ongoing now are unlike any that have ever existed before, and I think that just shows not only great partnership, but great vision as well. We see many of the same problems internationally, but maybe through a different optic. Bringing those two together and planning an action to go forward has enabled us to build capacity in terms of biometric systems in countries that have never had them before. Not only do they now have a national repository, but they have the ability to keep collecting that information and to share it internationally as well. And those kind of projects, combating foreign fighters and travel, couldn't go on without, certainly without the military. And that partnership is as solid as I think it can possibly be at this point. I know I discussed neutrality and I discussed military as being an issue, so maybe I'll take a minute to clarify that real quickly. What we're talking about is we can't use these tools in furtherance of a military action. It doesn't mean that our collective militaries cannot provide us with information that shouldn't be used for a law enforcement purpose. Clearly that can happen and it should happen. We've got great partnerships, as you do, overseas, and I think, again, these partnerships will continue to grow and flourish. Interpol's biggest challenge, if there is one, is training, capacity building in the member countries. The other thing is they've got a billion-dollar brand. I'll be honest, I knew what Interpol was before I got to this job, but much of what we know about it is actually framed out of pop culture, right? You know, the Interpol agent going country to country to country. That's the beauty of having two children that are in university right now. They can call me and tell me about all the movies and TV shows that they see Interpol incorrectly portrayed in. So it can be a billion-dollar brand, but it's a brand that when you understand what it is and you understand the true power and the nature of it, it's greater than one agent collectively running around shooting up the globe in furtherance of combating an illicit network. It is, again, creating a network to combat those illicit networks. And I thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. Thank you on behalf of Admiral Craven and all of us. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Let me talk a little bit about the remainder of the schedule this afternoon and a little bit about tomorrow. As you've seen in the book, we have an early start tomorrow. Those of you who have been to these conferences in the past realize that it used to take 4 days of your valuable time, and it was a real commitment that we really appreciated. Now we've sort of streamlined it down to 2.5 days because we know you're busy. We also know this is sort of your home territory, and it's easy to be pulled back into your everyday work. But we do hope that you will give us the time over the next 2 days to continue this kind of dialogue that we've already established. So we do have an early start tomorrow. You should try to be here about 8. I want to say we will end each day with a no-host social. Tonight will be a little more formal with Admiral McCraven hosting a social event. But at the end of each program, tomorrow and Thursday, we invite you to join us for a no-host social and drinks right out here, and just to talk a little bit more about the day's events. So I want to turn it over now to my colleague Larry Cook, who will talk a little bit about how this will work the rest of the day and get you back. Admiral McCraven will be here in time for the 1800 reception, and you're all invited to talk to him a little bit and meet with him, and he, of course, will be speaking tomorrow. So, Larry, why don't you tell everybody where to go and when to be back here and how this will work the rest of the day. Thank you.
Okay, glad to do it. Thank you very much, sir. So our next step is we're going to do a quick break, but there is one quick administrative announcement. We assigned each individual to specific breakout groups. We had to reassign a few folks. Colonel Yara of Chile, you were assigned to Group 6. You'll now be assigned to Group 2. Colonel Gomez from Colombia, you were assigned to 6. You'll now be assigned to Group 2. Mr. Fala, Group 3 now. Mr. Patishov of Turkmenistan, you will now be in Group 4, that is Group 4 from Group 6. Mr. Noval Tomil of Spain from Group 6 to Group 4. And I'd be glad to repeat some of this later if you need me to. And Mr. Salpini of the USA from Group 6 to Group 2. I'd be happy to repeat all of that a little later off stage. But in the meantime, after the breakout groups, we'll ask you to come back down to Marshall Hall, where we'll do a group photo with Admiral McCraven at the beginning of the reception, and that will begin at 1800. Phil, have I left anything out?
I'm Phil Lawler. I work with Stan and Larry, and my role this conference is to organize the discussion groups. We had, because of who actually came from the registration, we rebalanced the groups, as Mr. Cook said. I want to add 2 names to that list also. Mr. Asa Miller from the United States, we'd ask you to join Group 2, which is the blue group. If you have a blue dot, or if you have a gray dot, you'll now go to the blue room. And then Mr. Marco Antonio Campos Geronimo from Peru, also go to Group 2, please. So groups 1, 2, 3, and 4 are upstairs on the 3rd floor, the breakout groups. We have coffee for the break now downstairs, but if you go towards the dining area, and in that hallway right before the dining room, there's an elevator or stairs. up to the third floor. And when you get off there, just to your left, you'll see signs pointing to the breakout, the small group discussion rooms. And we've color-coded them and number-coded them. So group 1 is green, group 2 is blue, group 3 is yellow, group 4 is orange, group 5 and 6 are downstairs here, just back where we have the coffee. Group 5 is red, and then group 6 was the gray or black colored code.
One last thing. Your moderators are here in our audience, and I'd like to ask our moderators to please stand for a moment. So these are the moderators for each of the discussion groups. They would be happy to help you to the discussion breakout rooms. Unless there's anything else, please enjoy your break, and
Yeah, let me just say one thing. These groups are really important because they give us ideas for future conferences. And I know there's a lot of us here, but this breaks us up into smaller groups for more informal, productive discussions. And they have proved to be extremely valuable in the past, as I know they will now as we progress this program and continue to grow it for the future. So,
What time do you want them in their group sessions?
The groups will begin in 1.5 hours.
okay, what's it? A little before? Well, okay. So we have a break now and then till 5 o'clock or a little before 5? All right. We'll go to 16:45, then your breakout groups, and then be back here for that group picture, and Admiral McCraven will host a reception at that point. Okay, thanks.
16:45 in your groups, and at 1800 we'll meet down in the foyer and with Admiral McCraven, and we'll take a picture and have it.